Welcome everyone, this is Zonta with Repo Products. Today's video is on Bluebeam Review 2017 tips and tricks. For those of you who are not aware, I did a Bluebeam Review tips and tricks for 2016 a few months ago. Here is an updated one for 2017, and these tips can be used not just in 17 but also in older versions. The first Bluebeam Review tips and tricks is erasing from all of the pages. You have a situation where somebody wants to delete, say, the title block or certain data from the sheet, but they want to be able to do that on all the sheets. In this tip, you can actually use the Redaction Tool to select and create that area and then apply it to all the pages. And we will see this when we jump into the software as well as all the other tips. Tip number 2. Default markup layer. So when we're creating markups, we want to be able to set up the software to automatically place them on a default layer. And you can do so within the Layers dialog box. Tip number 3, deleting the last segment. If you're creating a polygonal shape and you want to remove the last segment because maybe you messed up, you can use the Control-Z during the creation process to remove that last segment. Tip number 4, drag the callout markup. As you all know, when you have a callout markup created and you select the box or the arrow, it moves either one. But if you try to move the whole thing, it doesn't move by default. You can actually use the Alt plus the click command on your mouse, and it will allow you to click and drag the entire callout markup. Tip number 5, paint format. You can use this tool to paint the property information of a tool chest feature onto an actual markup on your PDF file. Tip number 6, action to markup. Whenever you have a markup, you can actually apply an action to that markup so that it can be used throughout your entire process. And we'll look at that via right-clicking in the tool chest. Tip number 7, creating keyboard shortcuts or at least understanding where they are. If you want a list, there is an actual PDF file automatically created, and you can find it under the help. Tip number 8, creating a master legend. We know that we can take any markup or group of markups and create a legend of that markup. But what if you wanted to create a master legend of all the markups on all of your pages in the PDF file? You can do so by using the markups list. Tip number 9, using the navigation toolbar. Some people like to use it, some people don't. You can actually use the F4 key on your keyboard to toggle it on and off. Tip number 10, auto-size markups via a batch process. Let's say, for example, you have a whole bunch of markups and they're created such that there's a lot of gaps and spaces. You want to tighten everything up. You can actually use the markups list to go ahead and make that adjustment. Tip number 11, inputting the author and the date within any notes and note pop-ups. You can do this within the preferences of the software. Tip number 12, finding the centroid of a measurement. Whenever you're creating a measurement, you can head over to the properties and turn on that feature so you can find the exact center of the object. Tip number 13, creating note pop-up icon changes. In other words, when you're using the pop-up feature, note feature, it has a default icon, but you can change it to different ones. There's several to choose from within the properties. Tip number 14, email template. So a lot of times when you're working, you want to email this information out to several people, and you want to pre-format that email with information. You can do that within Bluebeam Review. Tip number 15, multi-space snapshot. So you can actually use the space features within the software to automatically create snapshots of each one, and then you can assemble them onto a sheet of paper. Tip number 16. There is a template within the software that's already set up for presentation slides, and you can take advantage of it. Tip number 17. You can actually create a new markup tool for inputting in RFI sequencing numbering and have it automatically update. And we'll see this when we jump into the software. And the last tip, tip 18 for today's video, is on searchable text within PDF files. Now you can actually use AutoCAD and Revit. You can head over to the settings within the AutoCAD software and put a check mark for SHX fonts. Obviously, if we're running the extreme version of the software, you can do OCR, optical character recognition. So with that, let's jump into Bluebeam Review and take a look at all of these new tips and tricks. So here I am in Bluebeam Review 2017, and the first tip is how to use the Redaction Tool to erase content from all the pages. Down here in the lower right hand corner of all of the sheets, I have an area that I'd like to stricken from the document, but I want to do that on every single sheet. I could go through the process of doing a search for the text and then redacting this way. But there may be situations where the text here may be incorrect or different. And so, for example, on this sheet, the text is different. So I just want to redact this area. I can head over to the Edit tab, head over to Redaction, and mark for redaction. I'll go ahead and create a rectangular region for redacting. Now that I have created it, I can head over to the properties and you can double check and verify the color and the redaction color. Using this tool, it only redacts this one area that I have selected. How do I apply it to all of the sheets? I can select that redaction rectangular object, right click it, and head over here down to the very bottom of the contextual menu and choose Apply to All Pages. Doing so will give me that black redaction box on every single page in that exact same location. And that's tooltip number one. Tip number one, erasing all of the pages and the content of the pages. Tip number two is how to set up a default layer for markups. Let's head over to a particular page that has markups. We all know that when we create a markup, for example this one here, we can select it, right click, and then assign it to a particular markup. However, I want to be able to set the layer to be the correct one initially, so any markups that I create from that point moving forward have that particular layer. If I head over to my Layers panel, you'll see here I have just a few. I can right click the one that I want and I can click Markup Layer. Doing so will give me a warning to let me know that any markups that I create moving forward will be placed in this layer called General Markups. So if I head over here now under Markups and create a particular markup, let's say a Cloud Plus markup for this area right here, and we'll just put Test Markup and finish the command, we can then look at the properties and right click and see under Layer that it's already set to General Markups. And that is tip number two. Tip number three involves deleting the last segment when you're creating a polygonal shape. For example, if I head over to the Markups tab, head over to Shapes, and click, say, for example, Polygon, and I'm creating some type of polygonal shape like this, and I realize, oh, this last one segment that I created is not what I really want because maybe I clicked too fast. I can use Control-Z on the keyboard to remove that last segment and keep going, like so. And then obviously finish up the command when you get back to the original point. And that's tip number three, deleting the last segment. Tip number four, dragging the callout markup. Here is a callout, And if I select it, I can see I've got some grips for the text and for the leader. And if I try to move the text, it moves the text but not the leader arrowhead point. If I move the arrowhead point, it moves just the arrowhead point. If I want to move the whole thing and I try to left click and drag like this, it won't do it by default. But other markups, it will. But if you hold the Alt key down and move your mouse, select it and move your mouse, the entire object will then move properly. And that's tip number 4. Tip number 5 is using the paint format command. I'm going to head over to the tool chest. I have a particular markup here that's called electrical. And if I look at the properties of it, you can see all the information and how it's set up with color and color fill and hatching and things like that. I have a similar markup here, but it's got its own set of property information. And I want to change this data, the way this appears, to match that of the markup. I can right-click that markup and use Paint Format, select the markup, and it will automatically change the property information of the selected markup back to the property information of the markup tool within the tool chest. And that's tip number 5. Tip number 6, you have the ability to apply an action to any markup that you want. For example, up here in the tool chest, I have a little stamp that I created, and if I head over to the properties by right-clicking, I can head over to action. I can either enable or disable it or define it, and if I click define, it shows the action window comes up. I can tell it to jump to a particular page, a place, a space, a snapshot view, or in this situation, a hyperlink to a YouTube site. Or I can also place the action to go to a file or a folder on a specific drive. So if I use this particular markup, you can see that there's an action button right here. And if I click it, it'll automatically open up a web tab to the actual location. And that is tooltip number 6. Tooltip number 7 is keyboard shortcuts. If you're ever unsure as to what the keyboard shortcuts are and you want a list of them, head over to the help of the software. There is a help button here, but to the right is a little white arrow, and if you click it, there will be a keyboard shortcuts feature here. Click this and it opens up a PDF file of the keyboard shortcuts, and it also gives you a couple images for mouse navigation. So in here it lists what those keyboard shortcuts are, and you can print them out and place them next to your monitor or your desk. That makes it easier for you to recall. And that's tip number 7, keyboard shortcuts. The next tip, tip number 8, involves creating a master legend. Here I have a PDF file with several sheets, and I created a new sheet and placed a master legend with all the markups in there. How did I do this? Let's go ahead and delete this and do it again. I'll actually delete the entire page. And so if you want to create a new page very quickly, wherever your cursor sits, click this lower icon right here, insert blank page, and it'll create a new one right after it. And in here I can place my master legend. How do I do this? Head over to my markups list, put my cursor inside there, use Control A to select all of the markups on the entire set, and right click, and then create a legend. The command is set to create the legend. I will place it on the cover sheet, and by default, if you look at the properties of it, it only looks at the current page over here in the properties. But you can expand this to say all pages, and it will list it. You can also edit the columns to include as much data as you need. So the more checks you place, the more columns of data will show up in your legend. So let's say, for example, I want to bring all of this data in. I'll check everything and hit OK. And it all comes in. I can position it accordingly. I can set up the line weights. I can set up the size of the font as well. I can do bold, italic, Um, and I can also set up the table style to be grid to make it a little easier to see. And we'll make some minor adjustments to the font size to make things smaller and fit nicely. You can use the arrow keys, by the way, to nudge the positioning of the legend object markup on the sheet. The nudging is moved quite slowly though. And that's tip number 8. Oh, and lastly, forgot, you can also head over here under the title and just change it to whatever you want. Tip number 9 involves the navigation toolbar. The navigation toolbar is located right here above the markups list. And it has a lot of great features that allow you to split the screen vertically or horizontally up to 16 times. You have the ability to look at the entire page or the page width, and several other features, panning and zooming and things like that, jumping from one page to another. Some people like to use this toolbar, some people don't. If you don't, you can use the F4 key on your keyboard and it will toggle that on and off. I prefer to leave it on so that you have access to those commands and you can work with them easier. But that's tip number 9. Tip number 10 involves auto-sizing all of your markups at one time. For example, if we take a look here in this page, we have some markups and there's a lot of dead space on some of these markups, especially where the text is. I'd like to set them all up so that they're all nice and tight. You can individually do that by selecting it and making a, pushing and pulling the grips, but that'll take a while. What you can do instead is head over to the markups list, do Control A to select all of the markups, and then use the Alt Z command on your keyboard, and they will all tighten up, as you can see here. And it makes it easier for you to very quickly clean up the markups on your PDF file. And that's tip number 10. Tip number 11 involves adding the author and the date and time within your notes. Here I have a note, and if I select it and expand it, you'll see it has the note, it has the author name, and it has the date and the time. And if I select it, I can obviously change things like the color. Let's do that so it's a little easier to see the name and the author and the date and time. But how did I make this happen so that it occurs automatically? To do so, I can go to the preferences of the software. I can either type in Control K to get to preferences, or I can head over to the upper right hand corner, go to settings and preferences. On the left hand side of preferences, you'll see markup. Click this. In here, make sure there is a check mark for print pop-ups and also for show author and date in the pop-ups, which is located here. Right here, show author and date in pop-ups. Click OK, and any markups that you create using this tool will have that information. So I'll head over to markups, put in a note, click to place another note, and the data shows up automatically. And that's tip number 11. Tip number 12, finding the centroid of a measurement. Here I have a area measurement of a rectangle where the corners are cut out because of the columns. I want to be able to find the center of this. If I select that particular measurement, I can head over to the Properties panel, and in the Properties panel, it'll show centroid. And if you click it, it'll give you the X for the center of that particular markup. You can, if you need to, by the way, click Edit under Show Caption to specify other data such as volume, depth, and so on. And that's tip number 12. Tip number 13 involves the actual pop-up icon itself for the note. And here, if I select it, I can head over to the Properties panel. And under Appearance, I can specify any color that I want, but I can also specify the opacity as well as different icons. So as I select each one, you can see the icon changes. And they give you a whole bunch to work with. And you just find the one that you like and you use it. And that's tip number 13. Tip number 14 involves emails and email templates. Here in the ribbon, you'll see under email, you can click the little white arrow and you can manage email templates. And you can create a new one specifying to whom the email goes to by default, CC, BCC, the subject, and the message. I created one earlier called Review Demo, and it gives me a template for the subject and the message. Because I've done this, I can head over and use the email command now, and it should open up my Outlook software. And using that particular email template, my Outlook will open up and it will input the subject, the attached file, the current one that I'm working with, and the pre-created information. Makes it a little easier for you to email information out quickly to everybody. And that's tip number 14. Tip number 15 involves using spaces and the snapshot command. Here I have some spaces, and typically when we want to punch an area, we can use the snapshot command and draw an area for it to capture to temporary memory. We can then use, say for example, the punch template, right click and paste, and that area gets placed on that sheet. In the tip number 15, we have spaces. And if you head over to the spaces command, and in that toolbar you'll see the spaces. If you right click each one, you'll see snapshot. And if you use that command, you can then paste, and it will paste just that exact space. And so you can do this for each one. And you'll also notice that when you place it, it lines up nicely as well. The only caveat about using this tool is that it captures and creates a snapshot of the area that is defined by the space. It doesn't capture and copy over the properties of the space, because if you notice, the properties of each of one of these spaces has a specific color and opacity. The snapshot tool will not capture that data. So if I go over here back to the snapshot command and I just do a general snapshot of this area, and I decide to right click and paste, that information gets pasted over, but you also notice it doesn't give me the color and opacity of the spaces. And that's tip number 15. Tip number 16 involves presentation and creating presentation slides. If you head over to the upper right hand corner under the View command, there is a presentation mode, and if you click this, the keyboard shortcut is Control Enter. Then it switches to presentation mode and it cleans everything up and just shows you the PDF file. And you can hit escape to get out of that mode if you need to. What a lot of people may not realize is that if you head over to create a new PDF file, in the new dialog box, if you scroll all the way down, there's one called PostScript Custom Page Size, and there's also one called Slide. If you click Slide and click OK, it creates a new one that's based upon a 4:3 aspect ratio for slide presentations. You can, if you need to, make your own slide and specify that as well. Just make sure you head over to Document and head over to Page Setup and specify the exact size. For example, in this one, I have it set up as a 16:9 ratio. And that's tip number 16. Tip number 17 involves RFIs and having a tooltip markup that automatically sequences that data. If I head over to my tool chest, I have one created already. And it's a text box, and if I right click it and go to look at the information, you can see that it's just a rectangle. And if I go to use the command, it's going to input the data and it automatically sequences the number up. How did I do this? If I select, let's just create it from scratch. Let's head over here. And the first thing I'll do is I'll create a blank text box. So I'll go to Markups, Text Box, go to Properties, specify the color, the fill, things like that, the font as well. And then I'll create a box like so. Now that it's created, I don't actually input any data to it. I create it, I select it, I right click it, and I'll add it to my tool chest. I'll put it under My Tools. Now that I've done this, I can right click that tool within the tool chest, choose Sequence, and Define. In the Sequence window, I can put the prefix of RFI or maybe CCD, for example, and we can specify the start and the increment number. And we can also uncheck renumber when the markups are deleted. So that way the sequencing number doesn't get reset. And by the way, you can also put a suffix as well if you need to. I'll click OK, and now that sequence is set up for that markup. So let's go ahead and use that. I'll click here, and now you can see it says CCD, and it's got the numbers as well. Now if I select it and go back and look at the sequence again, I'm going to put a space, a dash, and a space. That way, it'll rebuild those and it'll give you the extra space and the dash that you need so the number doesn't get so tight against the text. And that's tip number 17. The last tip is tip 18, and this involves creating searchable text within your PDF file. We all know that if you have Bluebeam Revu and you have the extreme version, then you can use optical character recognition, OCR, to create the text to make them searchable. And if I head over to Document, I can head over to OCR and use this command to look at all of the text and make it searchable. Tip number 18 involves how do we set this up by default within AutoCAD or Revit. Let's switch over to AutoCAD. And here, I'll start a new drawing. And in AutoCAD, the Bluebeam Revu extension add-in is in the Output tab. Head over to Bluebeam panel and click Change Settings. In here, under the Bluebeam Conversion Settings window, there is Transfer Data section. By default, SHX fonts are not checked. So if you are using any SHX fonts within AutoCAD and you have this checked here, as well as Revit, then when you go to create the PDF via this command, it's automatically going to create the PDF file and make those texts searchable within Bluebeam Revu. And those are the tips and tricks for Bluebeam Revu 2017 and older. And this is that next level tips and tricks that we were talking about. Thank you very much for watching, and don't forget, if you haven't seen the prior tips and tricks, go ahead and look them up under the YouTube channel. Thank you.